You're listening to The Play Pouch. It's a brand new year with new resolutions and all that kind of really boring bollocks. Yeah, we've been on a little sort of break, and we're going to be honest, been sort of thinking about what we can do, because this is a quiet month, and we're waiting for all good games to come out. And until then, we are going to discuss certain historical titles. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about the abysmal state that was Bioware's Anthem. Although it wasn't really Bioware's fault, it was more EA's fault. So we're going to get into all of that. But before we do, if you like our work, consider subscribing and doing all that other stuff, clicking the bell, thumbs up, leaving a comment. We would love to hear from you. So let's get cracking. Anthem was introduced to us. I mean, it was announced initially in 2014 at E3. 3 years later, we got a trailer in 2017 at the E3 press conference, at EA Play's press conference, and when it was announced, when the video was played, we've since learned that the developers had no fucking idea that this was a game, and they, were like, "Oh my god, we've got to make this." So it was initially slated for a 2019 release.
Yeah. Do you remember when we watched it first, Pete? And do you remember we were all watching it and we were all like, "Wow!"
Oh no, I was impressed. It was like, "Oh mate."
Yeah, we all were. We were all like, "Oh, look at this guy! Look, it's like playing as Iron Man, right?" Because they were showing all the flying around, and it's like, oh, and this is obviously during the whole, obviously Marvels was still really, really popular. Of course, it was going through that was still going through its big Avengers film phases. So Iron Man was his most popular, and we were like, oh look, you get to play as Iron Man more or less, right?
Yeah.
And that was a big selling point. And as we'll talk about it a bit later, that ended up being the best part of the game. And without that part, my goodness, how it would have been even worse. So we were all pretty impressed. I remember us all sitting there watching it, and we were all like, wow, look at the graphics and everything. Look how alive the world looks. And then, of course, we all find out that it was all gobbledygook, to use the lack of another word to it, wasn't it?
Well, now that we know that the developers were shitting themselves during that video cinematic trailer in 2017, we know that they were nowhere near, had they even started? And the game came out in 2019. So that's like, wow. I mean, like, the developers must have been under such fucking pressure. It was unreal.
There was talk of like crunch, which, in case people don't know, the crunch is kind of like it's when they kind of like make you literally work more or less around the clock. I mean, I heard stories. I don't know if it was particularly it's not just EA or Bioware, right? They are one of many companies. I think even like Rockstar have done this to their workers, where it's like, no, you work every day, and they've even gone as far as like, no, you kind of you sleep at work, so they don't even go home.
Yeah.
They sleep at work, and then they have food brought to them, and all these things, right? I heard stories about some of these places where like they'd get pizza delivered to them, right? And they'd stay. They would not go home. They'd sleep in the office. They'd get pizza and stuff and takeaways delivered to them, all funded by the company, by the way. So they were all in for this. And it would get really bad during the last couple of weeks of all these games. So it's not just Bioware who did it; it's all of them. Rockstar, most of them have all done it, dude. Very few of them have not done it at some point. The crunch.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really understand what it is they're doing in the last couple of months leading up to release. I mean, is it like bug fixing, or is it like QA testing?
QA, I imagine it's most likely going to be QA at that point, isn't it?
Well, what's the point of doing QA if you can't? Well, I don't know. Anyway, yeah, I mean, like I've said this before, in that someone really does need to sit me down and explain to me how a game is developed on a AAA level, because I don't understand what these developers are doing for 15 hours a day.
There was
Anyway,
there was rumours also, and it was a while ago, so I'm not 100% sure on the names of the people involved, but I do remember also hearing stories of whoever was the lead designer, the corporate people in charge. They
Neil Blomkamp.
was it someone like he went and he saw what they'd been doing, and he was more or less the individual person who said no, make them fly like kind of Iron Man, to lose the lack of a better term. So before that, that stuff wasn't even there. And it took one guy's idea to introduce the whole flying section. So the whole flying section was never ever planned. That was never ever planned to be in that game. It's something which this kind of corporate person literally said on the fly, and then obviously made it into the game and ended up being the best part of the game. The only part really that I think people remember was the mobility in flying around in that world. So what do you just think about it, dude? Their best idea came from like a whim that some corporate guy just said to them, "Yeah, this is shit, more or less. Just add that part in and see how it goes." And then, if that's true, mate, then I don't know what Bioware would do. What a shame, mate. Bioware used to be so good, bruv.
Well, no, yeah, it's EA. That's what it is. I mean, it's EA putting dickheads in charge and firing talented people because they want to save money. It's the same fucking story. And then they're shocked when they realize that their um, brain dead game isn't doing as well as their other titles were doing before, and all that kind of shit. I mean, I'm bored of it, obviously, like other gamers would be, but like, but this is just like a classic dictionary definition of how not to develop a game. They developed a fucking cinematic trailer in 3 years. So from when they announced it in 2014 and then showed it off in 2017, they must have been sitting back going, "Oh, what can we do? What's going to appeal?" And then, as you said, Iron Man was appealing at the time, and they thought, "Oh, we'll do that." That kind
So
of.
what do you think?
It's
What do you think they were doing with their weeks then, Pete? What do you? I mean, when you picture them, do you picture them just sitting like literally twiddling their thumbs, spinning around in their office chairs, like
what when they're coming up with a game.
just what did they do all those years? Because they crammed so much in, because so much of it was developed at the last minute. What were they doing for all those years when it was in the developmental stage or the pre-planning stage, whatever you want to call it?
I don't know.
What were they doing?
They were probably all on Epstein's island. I don't fucking know.
Shit.
But it's like they spent 3 years exactly. They spent 3 years doing what?
They have no
And
idea.
that's what it's like. What were you doing? Were you sort of conceptualizing stuff? I mean, like, were you taking like a year to build one armor set or something? I mean, we're going to get on to the actual
Yeah.
state of the game in a minute, but like this, what I was always pissed off about when it came to yearly events like E3, which is no longer with us, is having nothing but cinematics, like really impressive cinematics. And it's like, this is not what gamers want. Yes, it's cool. And yes, World of Warcraft triggered off that trend. But what we want is actual gameplay. That's what we want. We don't want to see like some amazing effects and stuff that we're never going to experience when we play the fucking game. And we can pick a whole list of titles that have done this.
Nearly all of them, bruv. To be
Yeah.
honest.
So, Killzone being the first of them. But yeah, so yeah, it's annoying when we have this kind of thing. And I feel consistently betrayed by this sort of tactic. And with, this game, I just felt so let down. And, when the game actually came out, it looked okay to start off with. We were like, all right, no worries. We got about 10 hours into it, didn't we?
I
About 10,
took
15 hours.
I talked him into it, folks. I got to hold my hand up on this one. It was
Well,
me. I did. No, I talked you into it. You were more skeptical than I was at the time. There's because I was such a fan of the Mass Effect games, even though this obviously came out just after Andromeda, obviously, which was a step in the wrong direction. Not gameplay wise, we've talked about that, but certainly, you know, the company had gone downhill, and this was their next game. This was their first after Andromeda. It came out quite soon after Andromeda. It wasn't even that long, was it? After Andromeda came out.
was it still being developed? Andromeda.
No, Andromeda came out before it because I remember saying to you they've literally just copy and paste the combat of Andromeda onto this game,
Okay.
which was the best part of Andromeda, which was the combat, which ended up being probably the best part of Anthem as well. That and the flying around. So I mean, this game came out like at a point when Bioware had just screwed to pooch, so to speak. Right, they'd have a lot of success, obviously, with their initial Mass Effect series, um, and
Fired a
then
bunch of people.
fired a bunch of people, and then Andromeda, which was kind of created, more or less created via their B studio, for lack of a better term, a lot of their kind of B work, and it showed, of course, with the finished product of that game.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, their A squad, in quotations, were apparently on Anthem. And that was one of the reasons why they kind of more or less unofficially kind of claimed, well, that's why Andromeda wasn't as good as it could have been because we were all working on Anthem, apparently.
Yeah.
That didn't age. That hasn't aged well. But the point I guess I was making is that so Bioware had kind of couldn't do anything wrong for a good period of time over their whole Mass Effect trilogy of games, which spanned like what 10 years.
Mm. Yeah.
And then of course they had Andromeda, which was their first big fart, I suppose. And then obviously this came out, and I think I regard this as worse as Andromeda. So this is a worse game than Andromeda to me. It's a worse game than Andromeda.
I
But
guess so. Yeah.
people were hoping, obviously, that Bioware would. There was no chance. Bioware were riding so high at the time that there was no chance that they would have two stinkers in a row. Right? Yeah, that would never happen. They would have learnt their mistakes because so people were so pissed off with like the facial animations and everything.
Yeah.
And if you look at Anthem, their facial animations were really good. And I think I've said to you before that maybe a bit too good. Like they put in more work than probably they needed to because they were so like trying to rob that stench off them that they'd gotten from Andromeda. It's like, yeah, we've got to put double effort in on the animation, the facial animations to make sure that they don't take the piss out of us. It's like being insecure. It's like they become insecure developers.
Well, this is what happens when you don't put focus on the games properly, or you're developing more than one at the same time. This is what happens because if especially when you're firing talent,
Mm.
right? The reason why that Mass Effect trilogy was so good is because you had a specific number of people at the right key positions, and they were dictating stuff, saying, no, 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 it's got to be like this. This is how this character needs to be. This is how that character needs to be. This is how the flow of the plot needs to go. All this talent just went, or they got pissed off at either BioWare or EA, who knows.
Yeah.
And you end up with a situation where they're developing Andromeda and Anthem at the same time. And as you said, the B crew was on Andromeda, which, good luck with that. That's just got no fucking hope. And then Anthem, where the A team's working on, and that ends up being worse.
Yeah, weird, isn't it?
Yeah. So, okay. So not all of Anthem is terrible. For me,
We played all of this co-op, right? So just so the folks back home can understand, we played all of this in co-op, right? We went into it. Like I said, I did kind of talk Pete into it a little bit. But we started and finished the whole game as co-op, and so we got the whole experience. And one thing I will say, Pete, before we do go into the whole of your review, do you remember when we used to get back from the missions, because this is bad game design, right? In case, and we'll get into it, where the missions were almost separate from the HUD. A little bit like you can say the Monster Hunter games. The Monster Hunter games did it 10 times better,
yeah,
where you'd finish the mission and you couldn't actually do much during the mission. You're so limited during the mission, which we'll get into. Yeah, and after the mission, after you'd finish the mission, you go to the hub point. And when you go to the hub point, normally they'd make you go and watch all these cutscenes. And I remember me and you, Pete, being almost like, oh God, we're back at the hub. That
Yeah,
means that we've now got to sit through and wait for each other to go and individually, because you couldn't do this together. The hubs were separate. So
yeah.
individually, we had to go and speak to whoever wanted to speak to us and listen through the cutscenes, which are mostly so bloody bland. Yeah, don't worry, their facial animations were fine, but what they were saying was poison to the ears almost. And I just remember me and you
Mhm.
just literally rushing through it. And this is Bioware, who had a history of making some of the best RPGs around, and we would just like skip. Can we just rush through it? Rush through it? And I remember you in particular, you were getting so like uh, agitated with like, I don't want to do this, bruv. I don't want to hear this. I don't want to listen to this. I just want to get to the next mission.
Well,
And
let's just call it out as it is. Most of the characters in there were woke.
I can't
You know,
remember.
this was
I can't remember
this
any of the characters, bruv. That's how
this
much.
was the start of woke culture. By the way, when this game came out, all of this kind of idea of female empowerment and equality for women, when there was an equality anyway, and it didn't even need to be mentioned. You have to go, all you have to do is go back to 80s movies to see that there was a lot of female empowerment movies. Um, so yeah, all this at this point they were starting to push an agenda, and Bioware got infected with writing, the so-called writing talent and stuff like that, where they would push. I remember there was one character in the game who was awful. I just
Was it the mechanic woman? Is that the one you?
I can't remember. She was just like this fucking muppet, and she was all she would talk about was herself and stuff like that. I'm really not fucking interested. And yeah, it just annoyed me that we'd had to go to back to the hub in a separate instance. We
Yeah,
couldn't go
yeah.
back together,
No.
and it wasn't a fluid process either. There was like a big ass fucking loading screen,
Oh, don't
and
worry. We'll get to the load. Don't worry about that. We'll get to the loading screens.
so not all of it was bad. Okay, so the level itself, the layout of the level, the actual mechanics were good. It was, the whole basis was there. It was just rushed, like incredibly rushed. There was only like 2 or 3 armor sets, and I thought there was going to be a whole ton, like they said there was going to be. And yeah, sort of flying down and all that kind of, it was amazing. And then
No,
landing onto a certain area and then taking people out before flying off again. That was quality. But there was no story, or the story that we got was like played out in some sort of like 10-minute cutscene towards the start, and
all
was
I can remember of the story, Dave, is that you've got that one little nerd guy, right? Who's like your little mate, and he ends up betraying you. That's all. That I can't tell you. I don't remember the character's name. I don't even really remember what he looks like. I remember he's like a kind of a little bit of a whiny character where he wants to be like you, and he can't for whatever reason. For like physically, there's something wrong with him physically, and he can't use the armor sets like you can, or something, right? And he's a little bit, and then he betrays you later on in the game. He betrays you. That's all I can remember. I remember the main bad guy was terrible. The enemies and the enemy design was so limited. Like it was
yeah,
just there was just
it was almost like a sort of
half
a
a game. Yeah,
beta release,
yeah,
and it needed like another 2 3 years of QA testing
100%.
and proper talent, before it got, anywhere near sort of the level of decency.
I mean, the characters were bad. The story was non-existent to bad. The villains were bad.
Yeah.
The game design was bad. As in, do you remember the? Do you remember the tethering? For lack of a better word, like if you played co-op and if somebody got too far away and it wasn't even that far, the person who was falling behind, so to speak, would be tethered to them and would actually
Oh God.
would forcibly
Yeah.
enter a load screen.
And then you just get snapped to somewhere
You
that's
get
closer
snapped to a
to.
location, and that was so immersion breaking. It's like, well, no, maybe I want to. No. You can't. You can't explore a bit.
Yeah,
If your mate gets too far away from you, right? Then you'll go to a load screen. Of course, it's not even instantaneous. You have to, of course, sit for a little load screen, and then you'll teleport to him. And how can that be a thing with a company as big as Bioware with their resources? And the game's only about 4 or 5 years old now, so it's not like we're going back to the early 2000s. It's still pretty recent in the whole scheme of things. That
yeah.
technology should have easily have been there to do that. I can't believe it. That's something I'd expect from a game that's 20 years old, where the game can't load enough of the map, so it brings you guys together because you can't do it. It struggles to generate the world.
It was so dire. I mean, like, Kotaku said around the time of release that after release, that Bioware was forced to develop the game for a year prior to release by EA. And because elements of Anthem were changing quickly, factors like game balance and narrative were difficult to address before long. Yeah, so they had like a year to
Do you
put
want
all
to?
this
Do you want
together.
to know what that sounds like to me? It sounds like a game that I actually put in my top five worst games list. Kong, Rise of Kong had 12 months.
Yeah,
So is this just Rise? Is this just Rise of Kong but with a little jetpack?
and a AAA budget
Yeah.
basically. Yeah, yeah. This is how not to develop a game, even if you're like a AAA company who has millions upon millions of dollars to spunk on developers and stuff. The first thing that you should do is not fire your talented developers. What the fuck were you thinking? What the fuck were you thinking, EA? You money grabbing bastard
Look,
to
but
do that.
because the people, I reckon, probably a lot of the people they fired were probably like they saw the writing on the wall, and so they were probably like, okay, so this is not the same company that I signed up for when I joined, and they probably were getting more and more. You know what I mean? The voices get louder and louder in the room, and they are probably getting more and more like, I don't like what you're doing, EA. I don't like the way this company's going, and they were probably starting to cause trouble, I suppose, for lack of a better term.
Yeah,
And they were just like, we'll get rid of them then. I mean, if all they're going to, if they're stopping what we consider to be progress. And I imagine they were probably called stuck in their ways. You've heard all this stuff. They were probably stuck in their ways and they were against change and evolution and all these things. And it's like these older Bioware members were kind of like, no, when we joined this company was obviously a much smaller company, and it made detailed RPGs. It made games like Baldur's Gate. It made Knights of the Old Republic. It made the Mass Effect games before you started uh, wielding your power. And then look what's happened. And it started really, Pete, in Mass Effect 3 with the botched ending. As
mm.
good as the Mass Effect 3 games were, and we have covered this, so I'm not going to delve into it too much, but that was the first warning signs, was Mass Effect 3 and what happened with that's ending. And the fact that that was also rushed and just thrown out there badly.
Do you
That was
remember
the first sign.
in 2012, Casey Hudson
Mhm.
said that they were working on a game codenamed Dylan after Bob Dylan because he hoped that it would be spoken about for years later.
Poor Bob Dylan.
Yeah. Uh, and yeah, in 2014, he leaves BioWare. So
So
like 2 years
he,
later.
so he saw it. He saw it first. He's probably the first one. He saw it. He saw what was going on. He saw the direction that it was going in, and he was like, you know what, I'm done.
Yeah, well, that was the big blow, and a lot of the developers got concerned, and because like they felt good under his leadership, and as soon as he went, the Dragon Age Inquisition suffered, and the development work on Andromeda suffered as well, and Yeah, so that was the first big blow.
and it,
Dave,
and it's shown in their work,
yeah,
especially from the writing standpoint, because as I said when we spoke about Andromeda, the gameplay I thought was actually good, and the gameplay in Anthem is its best asset as an overall game, alongside the Iron Man stuff. That is the stuff that it did to a decent level, was the gameplay. I
yeah,
thought anyway.
yeah. No, the level design, the gameplay, the mechanics, the gameplay loop, it was all there.
But the
It was
writing and
just,
everything was just the
yeah.
writing and the world setting and the world building as well. I mean, it's like night and day. I can't believe it's the same bloody company, to be honest with you.
Well, it was David Gaider, I think, who is the mastermind behind Mass Effect and Dragon Age. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but he left as well. And yeah, just like there was a whole bunch of talented developers that left, and it just left EA and Bioware in a mess. So and another thing that they were limited by was the engine.
Oh yeah,
It was
that,
the
that, that,
Frostbite engine, and the Frostbite engine wasn't designed to deal with the type of gameplay that EA and Bioware wanted for Anthem, let alone fucking Andromeda.
well, yeah, it played a
You
role
know,
in both games, didn't it?
they should have gone with
Do you know
another
if
engine.
obviously they're still working on obviously the next Dragon Age game, which is starting to look like a bit of a farce. Like, I
Yeah,
don't know how many delays and stuff God knows what in what state that will ship. But are they using the Frostbite for that as well, or are they using Unreal Engine?
I don't know, to be quite honest with you.
Mm,
Um, I would like to say Unreal Engine, obviously, but I don't know. We know that the next Mass Effect is Unreal Engine, maybe
mm.
Dragon Ages as well, but it wouldn't have started in Unreal Engine,
No, 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 no,
surely.
no, no.
So it would have,
Maybe that's why they're going back, and maybe
sort of
they've just
porting it over is
maybe
taking
they've
a
just said,
while
you
and
know
stuff.
what, this is significantly a better engine. We're just going to have to more or less start from scratch to a certain degree and just put it all onto. And that would explain why the massive delays. But this is about Anthem, so we'll try and get back on track about it. Right. So the story, we both agree, was rubbish. The voice acting was okay, but the characters were horrible. So we did, even if the voice acting was delivered okay, it was what they were saying, which neither one of us, we just wanted to hit the skip button to get to the next mission. So that's
What's
how
that
much.
noise, by the way?
That's me tapping on the.
Okay,
As I was making my point, I was tapping on the
okay.
table. Um, so yeah, the story was rubbish. The voice acting was okay, I suppose, but we didn't really care what they were saying. Um, Game design was horrible. The technical side of it, Pete, was borderline an abomination, as you've discussed, with all the tethering and there's so many load screens. Why was there so many load to do anything? Pete, it was behind the load screen, and these weren't short load screens.
Oh,
These
they'd
weren't.
last a minute, 2 minutes.
Yeah, these weren't like 5 second load screens. I mean, the tethering one was maybe not 30 seconds. Maybe that was a shorter one, but every load screen the game put you through, which was so much, was significantly longer than people have thought. We both love Angry Joe, and one of the best jokes he was making was at the start of his review. He'd start talking, then it would go to a load screen, and he'd take the piss, and that was incredibly amusing because he'd start talking, then he'd pretend to put in a load screen, and then he'd come back and he'd start talking again. Then it would go to another load screen. That was his way of taking the piss out of it. But it
Yeah,
was
yeah.
true. You couldn't do anything without having a bloody load screen.
No, it was a total farce. It was built poorly, by a crew of developers that didn't really have that veteran badge where they had come across these sort of issues before and knew how to deal with it. And it was the engine that they struggled with. And I mean, like the Unreal Engine isn't perfect. There's some optimizing issues with game releases and stuff like that, but The code is there and the ability is there to sort it out. It's down to the talent of the coder, and you can't just fire top quality people and then rehire like bellends from college who think they know everything, and then it turns out that they don't, and then expect to have a decent game release where they can make millions upon millions of, it's about time that corporations stepped away from game design. I know this isn't going to happen, but CD Projekt Red said they'd never be bought up. Apparently, they've been offered by a whole ton of people with a whole bunch of money. So that game developers, studios need to be independent, and they need to have their own time. They need to have the space to do these things properly and the proper talent. And without that, it's just not going to work. We're just going to get asset flipped, microtransaction-y online service bullshit. And Anthem was an early sort of, I won't say victim, obviously, but it was an early culprit, and we saw right through it straight away. As soon as it came out, within like a few days, everyone was like, "What the fuck is this?"
Yeah, it didn't take long for people to realize exactly what they were guessing the unfinished, and also as you said about the timing of it, there was obviously a phase, and I think it's actually beginning to die down now finally, which is a good thing. Where there was a fad of all these live service games like other games that didn't do well, like the Avengers game,
Yeah,
for
thank
example.
God.
All these live service games. I mean, that's the bloody Avengers license. How do you go wrong with that? That's another podcast, Pete. Bloody hell. Um,
Yeah, it's basically them rushing the job because they're so desperate to keep the costs down and make as much money as possible. So it's min maxing, right? And corporations think they know how to develop a game. They haven't the first fucking clue how to develop a decent game. And it's not all about your Fortnites and your fucking PUBGs and whatever fucking god else, Apex. It's about a good story, and a lot of people who are older than fucking 20 or 30, they want a good game with a good story. I mean, look how successful the Final Fantasy remake is. Look how successful Baldur's Gate is, and other titles of that caliber. It just goes to show, it's just proof that we're tired of this. Oh, give us $1 and you can have some crappy
and
trinket.
I think, Pete, I do think that the worm is fine. The worm has turned on it.
I hope so, mate.
Yeah, on the especially on the whole live service idea, that 2 or 3 year period where everything was coming out as a live service, and
Yeah,
although Fortnite is that, it is of a slightly different beast because it's like PvP battle royale stuff as well, and a battle royale has not died out. It might not be quite as prevalent as it once was, but that genre is still around because of Fortnite.
yeah, it's still
Um,
going strong. The
yeah,
game is free, so they can pretty much take the
yeah,
piss.
but the live service stuff, which was kind of like mainly like oh, co-op with your friends and stuff like that, and player retention, this obsession with player retention, and there was just a period of years there where nearly every other game was live service, or they'd take a well-known franchise and then make it into a live service, and I think this is one of the reasons why Dragon Age, the new Dragon Age, has been for so long, because initially it was designed or going to be designed as a live service, and then they've realised because of the failure of Anthem and because of the failure of other games like Avengers and stuff like that. Oh, don't people are rejecting this now, like they kind of rejected the loot box more or less to a certain degree. So we can't do this now because public opinion is going to shit on it before it's even come out, because live service has now got in that kind of dirty buzzword almost. So we can't do that anymore. So that's one of the reasons why I reckon it's taken so long, because they got to a certain point in the game, they designed it to be live service, and then they've realised that we can't ever release this now as a live service.
Yeah,
So now we've got to start again, well, we've got to change. We've got to change for big fundamental stuff of the game now to make it a viable single player game. Which, of course, as me and you know, should have been their plan from the beginning. If you want to tack a co-op on at the end, I think people will accept that. If you want to tack a bit of co-op at the end, but Dragon Age is meant to be a single player, Bioware single player fantasy game. That's like their fantasy IP now. But they wanted to turn it into a live service like Anthem. So that's one of the reasons why I think there's been the delay, because literally they've had to scrap all their ideas and start from the beginning after Anthem failed so badly.
Yeah, I mean, like you only have to look at. Let's see, who was it? Blizzard, who turned around and said, "Oh, you know, we're all about." You know, they were pushing their Diablo mobile game.
You guys have phones, right? Yeah, you all
Yeah,
have phones, right?
and that guy who comes up and says, "Is this a New Year's joke or something like that?"
Is this an April 1st joke?
Yeah, and they realized after that how badly that conference went, and what did they announce like not long after? Oh, Diablo 4 for PC, right? It's just like wow. And
Talk,
then
talk about
EA,
reading the room wrong, Pete. Talk about not reading the room. How could they
right?
get that wrong?
So that's one case example of how corporations quickly turn things around. And another one was EA when they said at one point, "Oh, you know, single player games are dead. It's live service forever now." And there was such a huge fucking backlash. What did they come out with as soon as as soon as people kicked off about it? I genuinely can't remember the game, but it was a single player game.
Yeah,
And
yeah. The live service genre, as short lived as it was, those 2 or 3 years where they thought it was going to be the next big thing. See, Battle Royale managed to actually gain a permanent footnote, I suppose. You know, they're a genre now. Whether me and you like them or not is irrelevant. They are a genre now, and they're popular enough where they're probably always going to be around to a certain degree now. But live service is gone. That model that they were pushing for so heavily is dead. Thank God that's gone now.
well, you have to start dividing things into age groups. Okay, so the young people, they love their fucking P2P online shit. They love their Fortnites and stuff. But for us older gamers, we want something with a bit more substance. We want decent stories and you know, just good gameplay and good narratives and really sort of like cutting edge. Uh, um, you know, I don't know, gameplay. Fuck me. But Anthem was just like a classic example of how not to do it. And you know, if you're going to half-ass it, especially within 12 fucking months, don't expect you know a, a long-lasting legend of a game. For fuck's sake,
You know
do
what? You know what else they did as well, Pete? Anthem was. Do you remember? These were all linked to live services as well. Do you remember? Do you remember? I'm going to say this, and I think you'll get an image in your head.
hmm.
Roadmaps.
Yeah, yeah. Star
They,
Citizen has roadmaps. Yeah,
yeah. For the live service ones, it became a fad that it was always, oh, this is a live service game. It's going to come out, and then look what's going to happen over the next year. This is our roadmap to the next year. Do you want to know how often these roadmaps came to pass? There was
yeah,
always delays because Anthem shipped in such a bad way. From day one, they were significantly behind schedule. So they had this. There was this feature that eventually did make it into the game, but by the time it made it into the Anthem game, the player base was more or less non-existent because they had to spend so much time trying to optimize and fix the broken mess of the game that came out. So right away they were months and months and months behind. So by the time their first kind of content from this roadmap came out, they're lucky if they retained 5% of the player base.
yeah,
And I remember watching some review on it, not Angry Joe, but it was somebody else, and they were playing through it, and it was this rubbish. It was a rubbish mode anyway that hadn't had much time put into it. But there's nobody was playing it. Your game was already dead by the time the first roadmap came up. And then, of course, they scrapped the whole roadmap idea. And then they had the audacity to claim they were going to fix it. So they made all these broken promises again,
yeah.
saying, "Oh, we're closing down the Anthem servers for a little while, but don't worry, folks, we're not giving up on the game. We're going to reboot it all. We're going to rebalance loot because the loot system was terrible as well, if you remember that." We're going to rebalance the loot systems. We're going to rebalance everything, guys. And then 6 months down the line, oh, yeah, we're not doing it anymore. Sorry. We've taken your money, by the way. We're not going to issue refunds.
Yeah.
We're not going to give you your money back. But we're not doing what we said we were going to do. So the roadmap was a pile of shit. So they lied on that. And then the reboot never happened. So they lied on that as well.
Yeah, it was disgusting. It was.
I don't really understand. I'm not a lawyer, right? So I won't claim to understand the law. I won't. I'm not going to understand all. But how you couldn't get your money back for buying that game? How that you were not actually able to get your money back for a full refund? I don't know, because they got away with it. They took your money.
Yeah, it would have been the fact that they did actually release a game, even though it wasn't as good as we were expecting. It's just within that sort of grey area where they could have gotten away with it, and they did, basically. And this is like the sleaziness of these big corporate games companies. This is what I've been saying all along. We need to dump them, get rid of them. I always cringe when I see these news articles of corporations buying up game studios. It's just like, oh, for God's sake. And I'm not overly happy with Microsoft buying up things, although in some situations it is potentially better. Blizzard being bought up, and then Bethesda being bought up and stuff. Hopefully, we can get some good, decent titles out soon. But I've said this before. I'm worried about Elder Scrolls 6, and I'm worried about other games.
I would, based upon obviously Starfield, I'd be worried about that as well.
Yeah.
I'm afraid to say. Okay, but I mean, I suppose like I say, the Blizzard thing, Pete. I think that's a future podcast for you and me to talk about.
Yeah.
The merger, not the merger, but the acquisition of Blizzard and what that means. Because obviously they're more known for their PC games. A lot of their IPs are PC only, so it's interesting if they decide to start porting some of them over to the Xbox. But I think we can do a podcast on that. I think that's on we should do one on that. So going to Anthem, let's try and review this nightmare and give it a score. I mean, the combat's okay. I suppose the voice acting is okay, and the cutscenes are okay, even if I don't care what happens in the cutscenes. Facial animations, all that stuff. Yeah, they nailed that stuff. That stuff's not a problem in this game. And the combat's okay, and you can fly around as Iron Man a little bit. And I say a little bit because if you get too far away from your mate, then you hit a load screen. So that's got to be taken into consideration. I can't give it more than a 2, dude. Really, I don't think I can give it more than a 2.
Well,
2 or 3 max.
I'm going to be slightly more generous. I'm going to go within 3, 4, just because they had the shell of it. It needed like 2 or 3 more years in the oven. And, EA being the corporate greedy cunts that they are, they decided to, force, anyway, we've been through this. So, yeah, the mechanics were good. The shit behind the screen was good. It was just the loading screens. It was the fluidity. It was the plot. But, everything else, it had a good basis. I said this before. It felt like it was, a Anthem beta, and it needed more work. So yeah, I'm just probably going to say 3.5, 4.
No, you've convinced me a little bit to up it from a 2 to a 3, but yeah, I ain't going higher than a 3.
Yeah,
3 points is pretty much because the combat was Andromeda's combat, which was the best part of both games. So I'll give it a 3 more or less, and that 3 points is more or less all because I thought the combat was all right. That's it. That's honestly it. I thought everything else was so.
I mean, a large part of the score for me is the fact that I was able to fly through a landscape, and that felt really fucking good.
Because the landscape was very pretty landscape, even though it was only really one biome, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was only one area. Yeah.
So it wasn't a very particularly big game area, but no, it was a very pretty area, and the fly mechanics were very sound. And they should take the flying mechanics and make it. I told you, they should have made an Iron Man. That's what they should have done. They should have had before Robert Downey Jr.'s character gets killed off. Spoilers in case nobody's seen Endgame.
Uh,
Yeah, right. Before they kill the character off, let's quickly put an Iron Man game out. We've got the flying mechanics sorted out. But there
no,
we are.
I just wanted them to just have Anthem that worked. But anyway, it's done now, and fuck you, EA. Uh, that's going to
Okay.
do it for
Yeah.
our podcast. If you like our work, please consider subscribing and doing all that YouTubey things. We're going to be trying to bring you a couple of new sort of style videos for this year. We're still working on it behind the scenes, sort of like formulating and brewing things. So we're obviously going to let you know in due course when that happens. And yeah, so until the next episode, God knows when that will be. Um, we'll see you soon. Take care, everyone.
Take care.